Welcome to Your Career Cure podcast, where amazing professionals and entrepreneurs share their inspirational stories so you can get a dose of a happy career, happy life. And now, your host, Gail Tolstoi-Miller.
Welcome to episode 4 of Your Career Cure. I am so excited. I have a wonderful guest today. Her name is Sedef Onder. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Gail.
Oh, I'm so glad. So Sedef has her own integrated marketing communication organization for 14 years. She's done very well for herself. And prior to that, she worked for a global PR agency. Now, Sedef, if you could just kind of fill in the blanks for the audience regarding your personal or professional life, that would be amazing.
Sure. Well, if I was to go back to my early days, I actually I graduated college without having a very concrete plan. And I had an interdisciplinary and a lot of business classes that I took, in addition to a vast sort of array of sociological and economic and a mix. And I think that's behooved me. I learned, if anything, critical thinking while I was in school and have stayed very open-minded. And all of that has sort of contributed to helping me, whatever path I landed on. And it was very inadvertent, my entering the public relations space, because I was kind of naive, I guess is a good way to put it. And I didn't have as good a sense of how it's been used by the business world, for instance, and to what end. But again, I think my ability to stay open-minded, and I think I've had sort of what the Buddhists call a child's mind, enables me to ask a lot of questions, get pretty deep, and I found it easy to advance in the world of PR and communications, and had a successive number of positions that were sort of incrementally leading me to a higher and higher step on the corporate ladder, until I began to realize that maybe one of the reasons for my success, great success, was I was a very honest, authentic, very ethical person who tended to, I'm a great fit for the service industry. And this is a professional services industry that I happen to be in. And I would argue that most business sectors need to see the world that way. And that approach, which had a lot of integrity and transparency, and it was communication and behavior with clients that demonstrated at all times, whether I was in-house or on the outside at an agency environment with multiple clients, that I was making decisions with their interest in mind versus a bottom line or a profit-driven interest. All of those things, I think, drove me to the peaks of my success, I realized in retrospect. So by the time that I left to open my own shop, at that point I was looking for ways to take the world of marketing, which I think in some respects has contributed to some ugly things in society, and that includes a materialistic and a very consumerist bent that hasn't always improved or helped society or the world. But I thought my learnings and my abilities in that space could perhaps be used to identify individuals, companies, and brands that were doing more good in the world and were creating uplifting experiences for people or providing people with quality ways to improve their lives, and sort of maneuver myself into that type of space. And we have worked with social entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and a lot of companies, brands, and individuals that we think do that. And that has probably helped sort of motivate and fuel my interest in remaining in this space. But I actually feel, having worked with a lot of different sectors, from retail to manufacturing and B2B to finance or technology heavily, that there is a lot of good that can occur within each of these sectors were the business leaders and entrepreneurs in those sectors to think the same way, and that it could perhaps help solve a lot of these problems we're seeing, not just in our country, but but globally, where people feel pretty exploited, or we're seeing huge income gaps, or we're just seeing that oftentimes things are done in the interest of profit, which aren't necessarily contributing in positive ways to the world, even though there may be some short-term gains that individuals are able to make. But I don't know if that gives you a good snapshot, or if that's what you're looking for, Gail.
Well, I think, what you're saying is that maybe short term it's good, but for the long term, if you're not being authentic and honest and truthful, you're going to lose in the end.
Yeah, I think that, you sometimes lose even after the first transaction. We are such a transactional world, and especially when it comes to business. And when you're looking for one-off gains, you actually don't build a repeat customer either. So I think there's often, I actually see businesses now where they're less worried about customers being happy longer term, but the short-term growth and scale and some ability to show numbers, even when those numbers are fraudulent, is a way to manage an exit strategy, or to, find a way to make bank and get out quickly and move on to the next big thing. So I would even say in the short term, often we're not seeing positive impact. We're just seeing money that can be made. And I think that what people are failing to do is they're failing to connect these dots and realize that the reason we have people feeling distressed, and we're seeing it, is impacted our politics and our governments, not just here in the U.S., because even when you look at Brexit and other things, trends that are taking place, it's all a similar theme that's playing out. It's people who are feeling that short-term, the only benefits that have accrued have benefit to a very small minority of people who happen to be at the top of the business world, and in other ways removed from really the masses of people. So I would argue that there's not a lot of short-term benefit for people who are buying. And, I'm even seeing, I pick up patterns and trends day to day in my life, personal and business. And I'm even seeing here in New York City that my last few experiences with various merchants, and they include, say, a Whole Foods, or they include a restaurant, they may include a taxi or an Uber or driver service, all of them include some level of scam. And what it does to me is, and I'll usually have the conversation with the individual, I'll exit that place of business, and that will have been a one-off ATM-style transaction for whoever is the merchant, but it's not going to bring me back to them as a brand, or I don't walk away feeling that there was any short-term benefit to me as a customer. So I just see that everywhere around me, and I'm pretty fortunate in the environment in which I live and the life that I have. And if you take that down, you sort of trickle it down to where it's affecting people at all levels across the country, you can see why and how we've got the problems that we do. So you're right that there are short-term benefits that are pure profit-driven. And I think that's part of the ways in which lots of people can enter the workplace, and be thinking differently, be founders, be entrepreneurs, and their success can be very easily modeled before them purely by offering alternatives that do work towards the satisfaction of their customers, that do work towards providing value, a perceived value that is equal to whatever financial or monetary transaction people are making. And that's where I would even say that the short-term benefits, other than for the business world where they were focused on, quarter to quarter earnings, even those have never been as mirrored on the side of the customer or the consumer. And that's where we have these problems.
Okay, Sedef. So I have a couple of questions for you. And, I do agree with you regarding being honest and trustworthy and being authentic. And I think the audience, when they're listening to this, they're probably wondering, authenticity that word is being so overused. So I have a couple of questions. One is, how do you define authenticity? What does that mean exactly? And what does someone do in corporate America, Okay. If they're an employee, I mean, let's face it, Fortune 5, we're talking about, let's say they work for a big organization, Fortune 500, and there's a corporate culture and you want to be that authentic person and trustworthy person, but that environment doesn't allow you to be. And I see it all the time that people are scared to be authentic or be truthful or honest and kind of call it out in the organization because maybe they're going to be blacklisted or, they're not going to support them and they're going to see them as the problem, employee. So if you could just kind of talk about those things, I know it's a lot at once, but I think it's all intertwined. That would be awesome.
Sure. No, and I understand where you're going with that. To me, authenticity is staying true to yourself. And I agree with you that there's confusion around this. It's become yet another buzzword, actually, for people to throw out there for any sort of perceived positive effect or impact. To me, and that's why I don't even like to use it anymore, it really has more to do with doing the right thing and making decisions that assuming that you have some moral compass, some sense of ethics to start, which I think may not be implicit in this, may not exist in lots of people who are getting out of business schools even, where frankly governance issues and ethics haven't been emphasized. And maybe they're even de-emphasized because the society we live in rewards the more illicit behavior, even illegal behavior, if there's a short-term monetary, financial gain in it. So it starts with having that sense of what is right and what is wrong. And that happens to be, my heart and soul. If I believe that, and then I live that, I act that in the workplace and in life, meaning I don't have personas. I'm someone who is the same person in the workplace, in any workplace, as I am in the outside world. So that word, for me, authentic, has really, it just means my being that consistent, predictable, and true to who I am in that moment, and very present, and not manipulating, I guess is a good word. I happen to be on the strategy side of business, and I think that can be a bad word in that if you're using that, I had a conversation with a friend recently about mindfulness, and it bothered me that mindfulness, similar to emotional intelligence, which has been around for a long, long time, for anyone who's been reading, I forget the gentleman who wrote the books originally on that. The moment those become tools of the business world to use to manipulate mindsets, they're being used. They're not tools. They're not supposed to be a means to an end. You're supposed to have these character traits as part of who you are and how you behave in the world. And the moment you begin to use those things in this strategic, manipulative way, it isn't authentic. And it's not serving the purpose of what, those words originally meant. And really the emotional intelligence is either there or it isn't. There may be things you can do to perhaps work to improve it, but it's certainly not a tool you implement to try to gain in some sort of behavioral change within somebody in the workplace, just as mindfulness should be used that way. And that was really along the lines of authenticity and where that's going, in my opinion. But to get to your other point, I saw a recent Harvard Business School report about, it was advising people, and I think that the title, I'm trying to recall, it had to do with calling people out in the workplace and calling people out who are at a C level. And I read it, and initially I scanned it because I thought the lead and the front end of this piece was terrible in that it was reinforcing what you just said, which is there needs to be all this forethought given to what are the implications and what may go down, what may happen. Now, I recognize why there are sensitivities in that area for people who are worried about losing a job, not sure where, they can't risk that. And I totally respect that. So I'm not speaking about those people. I think individuals in this society have been pushed into this survival mode, and most people aren't comfortable enough to be able to sometimes say things and then deal with ramifications if you have a family and obligations and other responsibilities. But I do believe that sort of mindset, this fear mindset, is what is trapping people. So the piece that I read, towards the end of it, I went back, took a second look at it, and I remember thinking the end of it had more relevant suggestions for people where it talked about the fact that if it's a senior person, a C-level person, you may want to wait and address this privately. These are, to me as a professional, rather standard suggestions. That's the way I would operate, just out of respect for that person. So there are ways to raise topics with discretion and be at lesser risk, but I'm not saying it eliminates the risk that there may be repercussions. But when we have a mass of people who begin to start saying and doing the right thing, that actually is going to create the groundswell or the momentum for other people to speak up. And you've actually listed one of my predominant qualities as an individual in all workspaces has been that I am willing to speak or voice what can be considered an unpopular opinion, but it's really just something that most people are afraid to say out loud, even if they're all thinking. I will call out the elephant in the room, and I have a history of this. Now, granted, I have often done it while also being one of the highest performers, if not the highest performer, right, as an executive. So I've had lesser risk because I've had a lot of things tied to me, whether it be revenue or clients or the ability to identify and secure that for the business. And it's given me more leeway maybe than most. And I started to recognize that later in my career, which is why I thought, I could probably go out on my own and without and still feel secure, which I do. But I think that, to your point, until we all start to speak up, people will get away with things that are almost intentionally designed to suppress these opinions and intentionally designed to exploit not just the outer customers, but oftentimes then it's the inside employees that are thus exploited. What we all need to do is find and reward and support those executives, wherever they may are, leaders across a company, and they can come in at all levels. I have hired many leaders right out of school, and they have proven themselves before my eyes, long after they left, we stopped working together at the same company. Those individuals are the ones that need to be supported. Those are individuals that when they do call something out, when they do speak up, what has to happen is all the other individuals who were so concerned that we can't risk this, they need to support them loudly and publicly because we have the numbers to back us up. I choose to believe that people are good at heart predominantly. And just as the studies that show that sociopaths and various people with disorders tend to rise to the top in business and government because there are narcissistic qualities that are being rewarded all around. And these are also the people who have the least empathy, and they become this way. And there are studies that demonstrate that as people gain wealth, it makes them more this way, even if they started out as more compassionate, empathetic people. That this is why in our society, this cycle of using monetary reward isn't contributing good, even in the business world. But those, and without I apologize for having gone on tangents, but I think it's really as simple as choosing to speak out and then everybody else supporting the person who's speaking out and doing the right thing. Usually it's a very small handful of people that may be profiting or benefiting in some way from a company doing the wrong thing. And so again, it's really comes down to the numbers. At the end of the day, all businesses and companies are relying on their talent, on their employees, predominantly, I'd say, in most sectors, many sectors, to the degree that people see things happening around them that are unethical, even illegal or other ways discriminatory and so forth. Those are workplaces dominated by labor force individuals. And so most of those individuals are going to err on the side of doing the right thing. So I don't know if that helps answer. I still respect the fact that, yes, there will always be people, and I think these are the most disenfranchised people, frankly, who have the least voice in society, whether it be minorities or women oftentimes and so on. They are somehow typically the most powerless to be able to do these things, and I respect that. And I work to sort of create opportunities and create a level playing ground for precisely those individuals. A lot of the work we've done for social enterprises and entrepreneurs and nonprofits has been to try to change that playing field. But it is tough to do, as we're even seeing in our political environment. But sorry, I didn't mean to keep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough for, especially, you mentioned you were producing and, they needed you from a sales perspective and you were bringing in revenue, but not everybody has that. It could be,
Yes.
An administrative assistant. It could be, someone at a different level that sees something, they really want to have that integrity, but something doesn't sit well with them. And maybe it's their manager. Now, if we're talking, and you mentioned about, discrimination or harassment, I mean, obviously someone needs to report that to HR, but even HR, we have to question HR too. I mean, I'm in HR, right? And I've worked with so many companies and I frankly have seen a lot that I don't particularly like in HR. And sometimes they perpetuate it, so it's within the whole culture. So sometimes you can't trust HR. And I'm not putting it out there that you can't trust HR. And I know people are going to say, oh, you're saying, HR is untrustworthy. I'm not saying all are, but in certain circumstances and in certain work environments, they are not, because they are part of that culture. And I think that, maybe there are times where if someone is working in an organization and it is completely against their moral compass, maybe they do need to leave. Maybe that's the only way to get out of this.
I do think that from a pure integrity point of view, that is the move to take. And I've done that several times, more than once. And I would even point out that while I've stayed in an environment with a CEO who was my boss, who I may not respect, I went out of my way to make sure I was not undermining the company nor that individual while I was there. Because while you're collecting the paycheck and the salary, integrity means that, if you're going to take money from whoever it is that's paying you to do something, for you to have integrity means that you need to support that. If you're not supportive of it, you need to change it or remove yourself, right? And so until you're in a position where you can remove yourself or change it, I actually don't believe in the kinds of things that become gossip-driven or dysfunctional corporate environments. But to your point, I still think that there are ways that individuals can find tools, content, ways to influence each other at every level. I just saw another recent TED Talk by a woman who wrote a book, Weapons of Math Destruction. And she was talking about algorithms, AI, a lot of these predictive big data analytics platforms and technologies being used these days, and how they're perpetuating worlds that incorporate discriminatory behavior. And even, they're creating environments that are unjust. And then that same data is being used as evidence to perpetuate these stereotypes. Just being able to disseminate books or reveal these things to HR people, because let's say it affects your access to jobs, getting hired. Let's say it affects your access to getting capital or getting funded. These are things that if we help educate even the HR people, at some point there has to be a momentum we're creating within organizations to do the right thing. There was in a particular example I remember where I've been in companies, and take examples like Uber, a brand that you can watch, and I've seen communications executives leave that company. There's definitely been one and perhaps more. Then you look at examples like being a communications director for the president. There have been a series of jobs related to communications that have been very tough to fill, or that have had people leaving for various reasons, right? When you can talk to people, CEOs and people in the C-suite, about how this will play out. And an HR person that wants to preserve their reputation, just as a PR or communications person or any executive that wants to preserve their reputation, can point to real-world examples where it just does not go well. It ultimately is going to bring a company down. We are seeing, I just happen to bring up a couple examples of things where we can sort of look at it and point to the reasons why things may be crashing or preventing a company's eventual success. And people can agree that if things were handled differently at Uber, this goes back 18 months or so at least, differently within HR and really at the C-levels, CEO, COO levels, they may be in a very different place right now, right? And I think there are studies that show that, financially they've always been, they haven't been pushing profit. They've had a lot of funding that they've been able to use to scale, but have they put themselves into a corner where they're not going to be able to turn the corner, because of all the other problems that they've caused for themselves that have been rooted in HR and even PR issues that people needed to call out much sooner. They may have done that to themselves, and there are now studies coming out or articles coming out in various technology and business publications that are speaking to this effect. Those, to me, are examples that we can watch play out of this trend in effect. So if business people are smart enough to realize they shouldn't be, cutting off their nose to spite their face when it comes to doing these sorts of unethical practices, they're going to be better off as a business as well. And now we can point to data or anecdotal evidence that shows that, I think, a bit.
Right. So I think ideally I think you could have it all. You could have integrity and you could have great profit. And I think that you've demonstrated that in your organization. I mean, your organization is doing really well. You built your company really quickly based on your integrity, correct?
Well, you're definitely correct in that there is a huge space within advertising, marketing, but probably anywhere, for people that are fair and transparent in pricing and services, and that they want the customer to be happy. Ultimately, that's their main goal, is to make sure other people besides their own business are benefiting, their customers. Their reason for being, for any business person, is your customer. So I have always had that focus, and our business has that. So you were right that it makes it easy via word of mouth, or really in other ways, to stay afloat, even through difficult times, because you come in and you're honest and fair in your pricing. You can be competitive, and you can even the value that you're delivering against that same dollar can be head and shoulders, let's say, above value being delivered elsewhere, where the work may be getting performed at a much lower quality level with inexperienced people. There are ways that you can differentiate yourself purely based on that sort of high integrity servicing. And that is how we have managed to sustain ourselves rather easily, I'd argue, in times where these cycles are not only affecting small businesses like ours, but they're affecting the entire industry. So navigating that honesty, transparency in pricing is huge. I would even argue that media, there's been certain things we haven't wanted to touch or get into because we think there is a lot of fraud associated with it. And we want to see players who can improve on that, who can innovate around that. The word disruption is thrown out there so much, but you never really see it happening in this concrete sense for customers. But ad fraud, programmatic digital media spends have been demonstrated to have so much fraud baked in, as much as 50%, that if you Google it, recent studies will show that customers haven't trusted it. The advertising industries even have been putting out studies to this effect, and it's in everyone's interest to get transparent and to get honest and to have integrity around how clients' money is being spent and what they're getting in return for that. So in that space, yes, we have managed to do well because we make it very easy for clients to work with us. We make it easy for them to stop work with us if they want, if we weren't performing. We're so lucky to have not had that happen. But there have been instances where I have known that the expectations of a client can't be met. And I have encouraged them in short term to use someone else. And that works in our favor as well, because ultimately they end up coming back. I have one business in particular that I knew that what their first 90-day goal and expectation from a PR point of view was never going to happen. And I encouraged them, and they were shocked by it on a phone call we said, let's disengage and maybe you should find a different partner. Of course, they came back a year later and the business hadn't survived. And they may, then they may have an interest in a new opportunity, and they're probably going to trust our opinion because we weren't looking to just make a buck off of them for as long as we could until they ran out of roadway. To answer your question, we've had lots of instances where doing the right thing by a client brings them back. We've had clients where we've referred them. I think I brought this example up before with you separately to other agencies that do what we do if we feel like the team is better there, because that team isn't available to us because they're full-time at another agency, but yet we feel as the client's representative in this regard, whatever individuals on that bench are people that we would hire if we were them, and we want to help identify and vet and recruit those individuals as resources for them. Again, it wins you enormous trust and credibility, even if in the short term it may have an impact on your bottom line. And I would argue it doesn't, because it always keeps you at the table. Right. You're like one trusted voice at the table. But yes, I agree with you.
Okay. So it almost sounds to me, and I'm kind of making an assumption that in your industry, it sounds like maybe they're padding the bill.
Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, digital fraud can consist of bots, click bots. And if people are paying for clicks or for perceived exposure online, but 50% of the tracked exposures are not real people, then yes, that's what's happening. Now, you've heard the argument in marketing where you don't know, 50% of your money is wasted, but you don't know which. That's been common thread, because I think outdoor print, there's a lot of traditional advertising where it's really hard to track. Digital happens to be easy to track. And what did our industry do? They immediately started exploiting the abilities to create bots, create, technological fraud, basically using clients' money, where you can create an appearance that something has had a lot of views, quote unquote. You may even be able to look at Twitter. People are buying likes. Half of these people could argue that a lot of alleged celebrity or allegedly popular profiles and handles have this huge following. And if you actually go down and look at the following, you'll see that many of them aren't real, aren't active. So there's way too much of that fraud built into now the digital side, where it used to be very trackable, very measurable. And yeah, those things have backfired in a large way.
Got it.
On the industry.
Okay. So why don't you tell me your worst, I'm curious, what was your worst career moment?
Originally, this would be something that I would be hard-pressed to answer. I don't think that someone like me, I certainly have never felt that I had a worst career moment. And a friend of mine once characterized me, who knew me well, as someone who, when the tide shifts, when the storm sets in, I merely redirect the sail and I ride it out to something better. And I think it's that sort of attitude that I have that has enabled me to never really see something as a worst moment. I tend to see opportunity in whatever is taking place. It becomes, okay, if this door may close, there are new ones that are opening, and it's my job to spot them. A lot of this also is rooted in my not being associated with or identifying with my work. So I am never so rooted in a particular position somewhere. Even now, working with my own business for myself, it's never so rooted in some workplace role that something happens to me that seems like this horrible scenario. Instead, because I'm kind of this authentic person wherever I'm going, I'm just evaluating things, opportunities, being present for things that are happening for me in every given day. And with everything that may cause someone else to be very uncomfortable, huge discomfort or risk to someone else, to me, it just becomes something I'm navigating for that day, and that I manage to very much leverage or work to my favor. That's just kind of how my mind works around it. So maybe the fact that I see opportunity where most people don't, maybe the fact that I'm not so attached.
Right.
Things like my persona, my workplace, my role, those are things that help me not really, I don't have a good answer for you because I've never felt that. I've always managed to turn what would be perceived as a setback into something that has sort of vaulted me into higher territory somewhere. It's worked out for the better. It's been a needed wake-up call, perhaps even. I don't know.
That's awesome. I like that. I actually like that because most, people will have the worst career moment and they could think of something that's definitely clear in their mind. And I think this is a great answer that people can really use for themselves and try to look at their worst career moment as not as a worst career moment, but as just where they are now and look at it as an opportunity. So I think that's great. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and Gail, I would even add to that. When something happens that makes anything appear that it's not a good fit for you as an individual, and it could be someone else pointing that out to you, meaning a workplace even, that individual should look at it and say, oh, good. Because something isn't good about this environment. And actually, I shouldn't choose to stay here. If for some reason my potential is going underutilized or underrecognized, if for some reason it's just not a good fit for the best I have to offer, they're better off finding the fit that is, right? Mm-hmm. So in a way, it's really doing them a favor. But yeah, go on.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. So now we are at the career cure round. And this is a lot of fun. Just imagine, okay, you were in a career cure contest and you could actually win $5 million. $5 million. But you need to come up with the best cure in order to win that $5 million. And there's a lot of competition. A lot of people are answering the questions. So you really need to come up with the best answer. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions and just answer them really, as quickly as you can. And the first question is, if you could cure everyone's career mistakes on this planet, but could only give 1 dose of advice or inspiration, what would it be?
Figure out what you do well. Stay open to learning and growth, but figure out where your strengths, your assets are, and find a way to plug that in someplace and not force fit yourself for something that you're just, as an individual, not well suited for. This goes to the point we were just talking about in terms of setbacks.
Okay, great. Second question. In order to improve corporate America, what would be the one cure that you would provide to improve it?
Focus on your customer. This is so easy. And it doesn't matter what you do, product or service, who you do it for. The reason you exist as a business is because of your customers. And if they weren't there and if they weren't happy with what you produced, you wouldn't exist, would you? So that is the most surefire path to success, is a focus on customers. And the best way to do that is to keep your talent, your team, happy and satisfied and able to do their best work. And the rest takes it from there. It sort of self-fuels.
Okay, great. And the last question, in order to cure people feeling stuck in their career, what would be the one cure for them to get unstuck today? What do they have to do today? The one thing to help them get unstuck.
Well, mindfulness is a great habit because all of us as individuals change in who we are, in what motivates us, in what we know about the world and think about the world, how we perceive the world as we grow. And start by being very mindful of where someone is, where you are in life, and the path you're on and how you got there and why. And figure out what are the things that you wish you had in your life. And based on that, what is the quickest, easiest path to get there? And what are some initial micro steps, easily accomplished, intermittent steps that you can take towards getting on that new path? A lot of it is still in that same vein of what are you supposed to be doing? Figure out your purpose and go there.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, Sedef, you have been an amazing guest, and we definitely have to bring transparency, honesty, integrity back to corporate America. It's a must. So how can the audience reach out to you? How can they connect with you?
You can find me on our business site at clear, which is www.clr-inc.com. My contact information is there, emails and phone numbers. That's probably the best way, but I'm actually pretty easily Googled as well to be able to find email and phone numbers. And I appreciate your having me, Gail. It's been fun to chat.
Oh, thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest. And remember, everyone, don't forget, happy career, happy life. And I will see you in the next episode.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. You can get more incredible career information when you visit yourcareercure.com. And don't forget, happy career, happy life.